Everybody knows the Roman bath. You've seen the painting in your head already. Marble the color of cream, statues watching from the corners, oiled shoulders, bronze scrapers catching the light, steam rising off a hot pool while half the city drifts through in a haze of leisure. That's the poet's version. That's the postcard. And it's a lie. Not because the marble wasn't real, but because it hides the only thing that actually mattered. Because a Roman bathhouse was never in the business of selling baths. Let me say that again, because it's going to break something in the way you picture the ancient world. The bath, the steam, the marble, the warm water everyone remembers, was barely a business at all. It was bait. And the man who understood that got rich. The man who believed the postcard went broke, feeding a fire that never went out. So here's the promise. We're going to buy a Roman bathhouse together, from scratch. And we're going to follow every single coin through the steam. The furnace bill, not the poet's version, until you can see exactly where the money hid. And I promise you, by the end, you will never look at a marble wall the same way again. Start with a man who knew precisely what a bathhouse sounded like, because he lived on top of one. Around 60 AD, the philosopher Seneca, tutor to the Emperor Nero and one of the richest men in Rome, sat down and wrote a letter that opens with a complaint. I live right over a bathhouse, he says, and then he lists, with the wounded precision of a man who can't sleep, everything coming up through his floorboards. Weightlifters, grunting and dropping their lead weights. A ball player, loudly counting his own score. The wet slap of a masseur's hand landing on a bare back. And Seneca, being Seneca, notes with real irritation that a flat palm sounds different from a cupped one, a pickpocket getting arrested in the crowd, a man who is deeply, hopelessly in love with the sound of his own voice in the plunge pool, the hair plucker shrieking to advertise his services, silent only in the moment he's actually pulling the hair, because then it's the customer doing the screaming. And underneath all of it, the sellers, the cake man, the sausage man, the pastry man, each one with his own sing-song cry threading through the noise. Now, listen to that letter again. Because a great philosopher heard chaos, he heard a headache. He heard the collapse of civilized quiet. But that is not the sound of people washing. That is the sound of money changing hands. Every grunt, every slap, every shrieked advertisement, every sing-song price, that's a transaction. A Roman bathhouse was not a bath, it was a crowd, and everything a crowd can be sold. Seneca, the philosopher, the millionaire, the man who tutored an emperor, he sat in that room and never once asked the only question that mattered. Who owns the noise? It takes most bath owners years to figure that out. It's going to take us this whole story to see what it was really worth. And here's the part that should make you smile. By the end, you'll realize Seneca wasn't just complaining about the machine. He was inside it. He was paying into it. The great philosopher was a line item on somebody's ledger, and he never even knew. But before we get to that, forget the postcard entirely. Let's be precise about what we're actually buying, because the myth starts the moment you imagine the wrong building. You are not buying the baths of Caracalla. You're not buying the Emperor's Marble Mountain, the one that needed above 13,000 men in a single peak year to build, laying more than 2,000 tons of material every single day, just to make a hall where 600 people could bathe at once. We'll come back to that monster later, and the numbers will genuinely hurt. But that's not a business. Nobody spends a fortune like that to earn the smallest coin in the empire back one visitor at a time. Hold that thought, it's the key to everything. What you're buying is a balneum, a neighborhood bath, a commercial one, the ordinary kind. And here's how fast this industry was growing. Back in 33 BC, a census of Rome counted about 170 of these. By the time Pliny the Elder was writing in his own lifetime, he said the count was closing in on 1,000. And when officials finally catalogued the city in the 4th century, they logged 11 imperial bath palaces and roughly 850 of these ordinary balnea. 850. This was the fastest growing crowded industry in the largest city the ancient world had ever built. Everybody wanted in. Which should be your first warning. When everybody rushes into a business, somebody is getting rich, and it usually isn't the people doing the rushing. The layout in one breath, a changing room, a cold room, a warm room, and a hot room. That last one sitting on a raised floor with fire running underneath it. Remember that raised floor, because that raised floor is where your money is going to go to die. Now here's where the schoolbook version and the follow the money version split for good. The postcard tells you the bath was a temple of leisure, a gift of civilization, a place Romans went to relax. And all of that is true on the surface, but underneath every warm room in the empire was a furnace that could never ever go out. Very
Fresh
few people
bread and
picture that
sweet
furnace.
figs.
Very
The
few
freshest
ask who
grapes in the
hauls the
city.
firewood,
Get 'em here.
over 100 tons of it a year. Who pays the stoker? Who pays the man guarding the cloaks? Who pays off the official from the aqueduct office standing at your back door with his hand out? That's the real bathhouse, not the steam. The bill for the steam. And here's the uncomfortable truth the marble was built to hide. The price of getting in was almost nothing. We'll do the full math later, but I'll give you the shape of it now because it changes the whole picture. The standard entry fee at a Roman men's bath was 1 quadrans, the smallest coin Rome minted, 1/16th of a sestertius. We know this from Cicero, from Horace, from Juvenal. The price was so famously tiny that a quadrans basically became Roman shorthand for the cheapest thing that exists. So sit with the contradiction. You are about to sink a fortune. We'll see the real numbers next, and they are staggering. Into a building whose entire advertised product sells for the least valuable coin in circulation. A furnace that eats a forest. A ticket priced at a rounding error. On paper, this is insane. On paper, this is a machine for turning firewood into steam, and steam into almost nothing. And that right there is the myth. Not that the baths were beautiful, they were. Not that Romans loved them, they did. The myth is that the bath was the business. Because if you actually believed that the steam and the marble and the 1 quadrans ticket were how the money got made, you have already lost. You'll pour your life savings into the shell, light the fire, and spend the rest of your days watching cart after cart of firewood roll up to your back door while a coin worth almost nothing trickles in the front. The men who got rich, and some of them got staggeringly rich, richer than you can easily imagine, understood something the postcard will never tell you. They understood that they weren't selling baths at all. They were renting out the crowd. The water pulled the people in. And the people, hungry, cold, carrying valuables, standing around with time to kill, paid for everything else. The concessions, the cloakroom, the shops built into the walls, the apartments upstairs. Even the philosopher on the top floor, cursing the noise, was writing his complaint from inside somebody's income property. To see how it's done, forget the politics, forget the poetry, and do what the smartest owners in the empire did. Open the ledger, follow the coin, and to do that honestly, we first have to understand Roman money itself, because every price in this story runs through it, and one number in particular is going to become our ruler for everything that follows. 4 small bronze coins called quadrantes make 1 as. 4 asses make 1 sestertius. 4 sestertii make 1 silver denarius. And the only figure you truly have to remember is this. An ordinary labourer in 1st century Italy earned around 3 to 4 sestertii for a full day's work. That's our measuring stick. From here on, we don't count in dollars or in guesses. We count in working days. It's more honest, and you're about to see exactly why. Because when we tally up what this building costs before you light a single fire, the number is going to be measured in human lifetimes of labour. And the ticket to walk through the front door will still be 1 quadrans. That gap between what the building costs and what the bath earns is the whole mystery. It's the gap the myth exists to paper over. And somewhere inside that gap, a small number of very clever, very cynical people found one of the most durable money machines in history and carved its operating manual into bronze. So let's stop admiring the marble. Let's go down to the basement where the fire is and start adding up what it actually costs to own the ancient world's most beautiful trap. So you've decided to do it. You want to own a Roman bathhouse. Good. Now let's find out what that ambition actually costs. And let's do it the honest way, in working days, not in fantasy. Because the marble is going to lie to you about the price, the furnace never will. Start with the building itself and immediately hit a wall, a strange, revealing wall. No receipt survives for what a private balneum cost to buy. Not one. Anywhere in the entire record, there is no clean price tag for a neighborhood bath. And I want you to remember that Because any channel, any book, any confident voice that quotes you a single tidy number for what a Roman bath cost is simply making it up. The honest answer is, we don't have the invoice. What we have is something better. We have the shape of the money, and the shape is terrifying. Here's how we know it. Thanks to the historian Richard Duncan Jones, who spent his entire career collecting Roman price inscriptions off the walls and tombs and monuments of the empire, we have the endowments. These were funds, foundations essentially, that wealthy citizens set up not to build a town's baths, but simply to keep them running. And those endowment funds ranged from about 30,000 sestertii on the low end to 400,000 at the very top. Read that carefully. That is not the cost of construction. That is the cost of maintenance. That is the money you set aside just so the doors stay open. Now put 400,000 sestertii onto our ruler. Remember, a laborer earns 3 to 4 a day. So 400,000 sestertii is roughly 100,000 working days. A laborer's entire lifetime of wages, several times over, parked in a fund for the single purpose of keeping the water hot. Somebody looked at a bathhouse and concluded that the kindest, most generous gift a rich citizen could leave his town wasn't food, wasn't a temple, wasn't a statue of himself. It was an operating subsidy for the baths, because everyone understood the ugly secret. This thing devours money faster than a town can feed it. And that's just maintenance. Whatever the building itself cost to construct, it sat somewhere above a number that already sounds like a fortune. So let's actually walk through what you're paying for, piece by piece, because every layer of this building is a small financial wound. The shell is the least of it. The shell is just the beginning. Because under that hot room floor, the raised one I told you to remember, goes the hypocaust. Picture stacks of tile pillars, dozens and dozens of them, holding the entire floor surface up off the ground so that smoke and hot air from the furnace can flow underneath your customer's feet. That's how the heat works. That's the whole magic trick of the Roman bath. Fire in the basement, warmth rising through a hollow floor. And then it doesn't stop at the floor. Hollow tiles run inside the walls, carrying the heat upward, wrapping the hot room in warmth. Every single one of those tiles, every pillar, every hollow wall segment, custom made by hand. There is no warehouse of standard parts. You are commissioning a heating system, one fired clay piece at a time. Then the water. Water moves through lead pipes into bronze boilers. And here's where a modern person needs to stop and recalibrate. Because we hear bronze boiler and think plumbing supply. In Rome, bronze is not a budget material. Bronze is money. When you build your boilers, you are taking a small fortune in metal and burying it inside your own walls, where it will sit under constant heat and pressure, slowly corroding, for as long as the building stands. Lead for the pipes, bronze for the boilers. This is one of the reasons no cheap bathhouse was ever really cheap. You're not plumbing a building. You're entombing metal currency in the machinery. And now comes the trap, the finish. This is the decision that ruins careful men. Your customers have all seen the emperor's baths. They've walked through halls where marble covers every surface, where statues line the corridors, where there is actual glass, real window glass, set into the hot room. And that glass is not decoration, by the way. That glass is one of the most advanced technologies Rome possessed. A glazed, south-facing window
Did you
traps
hear
the
about the
sun's
gladiator
warmth and
fight
saves you
tomorrow?
fuel.
I need 2 loaves
Scholars
of bread,
have studied
quickly.
these windows, and they were genuinely clever, and they were genuinely expensive. So your customers arrive at your door already carrying the emperor's standard in their heads, which puts you in front of a choice with no good answer. Option 1, painted plaster, cheap, fast, honest. And you open your doors looking shabby next to the marble palace 2 streets over, and your crowd feels it the moment they walk in. Option 2, marble and glass and statuary. And you watch your budget triple before opening day, before a single customer has paid you a single coin. That is the trap the myth sets. The postcard tells your customers what a bath should look like, and then you have to pay for the postcard or lose the crowd. Either way, the marble wins and you pay. Add it all up. The shell, the hypocaust floor, the lead pipes, the bronze boilers, the finish, whatever you chose. And here's the part that should make your stomach drop. You have now spent a fortune measured in human lifetimes of labor, and you still haven't lit a single fire. You don't have a business yet. You have an expensive, cold, empty building. The fire is next, and the fire is about to become the most demanding business partner you have ever had in your life. Because a bathhouse does not run itself. Meet your staff, and Seneca, as it happens, already introduced you to half of them through his floorboards. First, the fornicator, your stoker. His entire job, his whole reason to exist, is making sure the furnace never dies. And this is not laziness insurance. A cold hypocaust takes hours to bring back up to temperature. Hours. And a cold bath earns nothing. Worse than nothing, because your fixed costs keep running while the water's not hot. So the fire gets banked at night, but the building can never truly fully go cold. Ever. That's the first thing about this business that never forgives you. The furnace is always on, whether you're winning or losing. Then the capsarius, your cloakroom man who guards clothes while their owners bathe. Keep an eye on him, because Roman writers describe the capsari as famously light-fingered. That's not a slander I'm inventing, it's a stock character. He comes back later in our story, and when he does, he turns out to be a source of income, not just a liability. File him away. Then the unctor, who rubs the customers down with oil. The depilator, who plucks armpit hair for a fee. The shrieking advertiser from Seneca's letter, screaming his services between victims. And at the front door sits your balnita, the manager who actually takes the coins. But before you get comfortable running this little enterprise, one warning about that last roll. And it's a warning that decides the ending of this entire story. In Roman eyes, running a bathhouse ranked somewhere down near tavern keeping on the social ladder, which is to say, near the bottom. The satirist Juvenal sneered at it. Roman legal texts filed it among the disreputable trades, the jobs a respectable person didn't admit to. So understand what you are and aren't buying. You are not buying prestige. You are buying a money machine that polite society looks down on. Hold on to that, because at the end, when we tally the winners and losers, that little sneer turns out to be the difference between a man who cries about the snobbery all the way to his strongbox and a man who goes broke with his dignity intact. Now, most of these workers were slaves, and an ordinary slave cost somewhere between 1,200 and 2,500 sestertii. Put that on the ruler, 300 to 800 working days of value per person before you have fed or housed a single one of them. Your staff is a capital purchase, sitting on your books like the boilers do. But here's the twist, and it's important. The staff isn't even your biggest cost. The building itself is hungrier than the people. The building eats more than the workers do, and what it eats is fuel. In 1978, a researcher named Tony Rook studied a small Roman bath in Britain and worked out its actual appetite. Not a guess, a reconstruction from the physical evidence. His figure, about 13 kilograms of wood per hour, burning continuously across an entire year. Do that math and it comes to roughly 114 tons of firewood. A year. Cart after cart after cart, rolling up to your back door, week after week, forever. There is no off-season for the furnace. The wood must arrive whether 400 people come through your door that day or 40. And if you want proof of just how heavy that burden felt to Romans themselves, here it is. One Roman charitable fund existed for a single specific purpose, supplying a town's bath with 400 cartloads of hardwood. Someone with money to give away looked at their community, weighed all the possible gifts, and decided the most useful, most generous thing they could do was buy the baths their firewood. That's how you know the fuel bill was the beating, terrifying heart of this whole business. Then there's water, which you'd think would be simple in a city famous for its aqueducts, and which turns out to be its own small nightmare. If you're lucky, an aqueduct runs near your street. But you do not just stick a pipe in and help yourself. Rome's water commissioner, a man named Frontinus, wrote an entire book about the water system, and it reads less like an engineering manual and more like a fraud investigation. A legal connection required a government grant and a standardized bronze nozzle, sized precisely to meter exactly how much flow you'd been approved for. And Frontinus spends page after furious page fuming about illegal taps, bribed watermen and secret pipes, because stealing city water was practically a national sport. So your water is either a state-controlled, metered, bureaucratic line item with an official's palm to grease, or, if there's no aqueduct on your street, It's wells, cisterns, and yet more paid hands hauling buckets all day long. And one last line on the bill: olive oil. Romans didn't wash with soap. They coated themselves in oil and scraped it off with those curved bronze strigils. A serious bath kept the oil flowing the way a modern gym keeps towels stocked, constantly, invisibly, expensively. So here is your position now. Stand back and look at what you've built. A furnace that eats a forest, 114 tons a year, and never goes cold. A staff you purchased outright, sitting on your books like boilers. A water supply run by the state with a metered bronze nozzle and a bribe attached. Oil flowing out the door daily. A fortune in bronze and lead corroding inside your own walls. You have assembled one of the most expensive, most demanding, most relentlessly hungry machines in the ancient world. And you still charge 1 quadrans at the door. That gap between this monstrous forest-eating cost and that single laughable coin is impossible. It cannot work. On these numbers alone, every bath owner in Rome should have gone bankrupt. And yet 850 of them ran at once, and a few of their owners became some of the richest people in human history. Which means the ticket at the door was never the point. There was another engine hidden inside this building, one Seneca heard every single day and never recognized. And to find it, we have to stop counting what the fire costs and start asking who else is inside the building and what they're paying to be there. So the business is impossible. We established that. A furnace eating 114 tons of firewood a year, a staff bought outright, bronze rotting in the walls, water metered by the state, and 1 quadrans at the door. The smallest coin Rome mints, 1/16th of a sestertius. On these numbers, you go broke. So let's finally do the math that makes it insulting, and then let's find the hidden players who made it work anyway. A laborer earns 3 to 4 sestertii a day. That's 48 to 64 quadrans. So one day of hauling bricks buys that laborer 50 or 60 visits to the bath. Your ticket price isn't cheap. Cheap doesn't cover it. Your ticket price is a rounding error in a working man's day. And you can't even fix it by charging more because the bath 2 streets over still charges 1 quadrans. And the moment you raise your price, the crowd simply walks past your door to his. The fee was pinned to the floor by custom, by competition, and, we'll get to this, by something much bigger and much more deliberate. So far, this business is a machine for turning firewood into steam, and steam into almost nothing. Here is where it starts making money. And the clue was in Seneca's letter the whole time. Go back to that floor he hated. The cake seller, the sausage man, the pastry vendor, each singing his own price. Now ask the one question Seneca, brilliant, wealthy, oblivious, never thought to ask. What are they doing inside the building? And the answer is, they're paying. Every one of them. The food sellers work your floor because you charge them for the pitch. The masseur takes his fee from the customer, and you take a cut of the space he works in. Same for the depilator, the barber, the oil seller, the towel man. Every single sound that came up through Seneca's floor and ruined his afternoon was a separate small business, operating inside yours, paying rent for the privilege. The noise the philosopher despised wasn't noise. It was an income statement being read aloud, one shriek at a time. That's your first real revenue stream, the concessions. The crowd is a captive market, and you sold access to it. Second stream, the cloakroom. Remember the light-fingered Capsarius? Here's why he's an asset. He watches clothes for a fee, and customers pay that fee gladly, because bath theft was a genuine epidemic. This wasn't occasional. Roman law had a standing legal category for these criminals. Fures balneari, bath thieves, an entire named class of crime. And the evidence of how much people feared them is astonishing. At the sacred hot springs in Roman Britain, Bath in England, archaeologists pulled about 130 curse tablets out of the water. Little sheets of lead where victims scratched out their fury and dropped them in as offerings to the goddess. And a huge share of them are bath theft victims begging for divine revenge. One man, named Docilianus, curses whoever took his hooded cloak, asking the goddess to deny the thief sleep, to deny him his children, until the cloak comes back. That's real terror, preserved in lead for 18 centuries. Now look at that terror from the owner's chair. Your customer's fear of thieves is what makes the cloakroom fee feel like a bargain. The crime problem isn't a liability, it's a revenue line. The worse the bath thieves are, the more valuable your capsarius becomes. You are, in a very real sense, monetizing the danger of your own building. Third stream, and this is the big one, the one that dwarfs everything else. The building itself. A bathhouse pulls hundreds of people to one fixed address, every single day, rain or shine, in a habit that never breaks. Think about what foot traffic like that does to every doorway around it. It makes them valuable, so you build shops into your street frontage and rent them out. You put apartments upstairs and rent those too. And here's the beautiful part. Here's the part that closes the loop on our whole story. Seneca, the great philosopher, grumbling about the racket below him, was a paying tenant in somebody's income
Fresh
property.
bread and sweet
The
figs.
bath was the anchor that made his
freshest grapes in the
apartment
city.
worth renting in the
Get 'em
first
here.
place. He was complaining about the very engine that produced his own address. He was inside the machine, paying into it, cursing it, and never once saw the ledger he was written on. And if you want proof this was a deliberate strategy, a designed money machine and not some happy accident, Pompeii preserved the evidence on a wall under the ash for us to read. In 62 AD, an earthquake tore through Pompeii and wrecked its public baths. Into that gap, into that broken market, stepped a woman named Julia Felix. And her name tells you she was nobody special. She's recorded as the daughter of Spurius, which is the Roman way of writing father unknown. No senators in her family tree. No inherited prestige. What she had was a large property on the east side of town and an eye for a broken market. So she converted her estate, opened her private baths to the paying public, and posted an advertisement, an actual ad which survived under the ash. It offers, on the estate of Julia Felix for rent, the elegant Venus baths, shops, upstairs stalls and apartments. Term, 5 years. Now read that ad the way an accountant would, not the way a tourist would. She isn't selling admission, she barely mentions the bathing. She is renting out the baths, the shops and the housing as one single package, to a tenant who will run the whole thing. The bath is the bait that fills the shops and the rooms are where the money actually lives. And the lease is the business. Julia Felix, daughter of nobody, did not run a bathhouse. She ran a crowd, and she rented out every wall that crowd walked past. That's the whole model, carved into an advertisement by a woman the Roman aristocracy would never have invited to dinner. There's one footnote here, and honesty requires it. Some bathhouses sat close to the sex trade. At Pompeii's suburban baths, the changing room has numbered shelves with explicit paintings above each one, and historians genuinely argue about what that means, whether it was a menu of services available upstairs or just Roman locker room humor. Nobody can prove which, so we'll mark it disputed and keep moving, because the documented money is impressive enough without guessing at the rest. So add the streams together: concessions, cloakroom, shops, apartments. And suddenly the quadrans at the door, the coin the whole myth is built around, is the least interesting coin in the entire building. You were never selling baths, you were selling proximity to a crowd, 6 different ways. But one problem remains, and it's the exact problem that ruins most owners, the one that separates the fortunes from the failures. Every stream we just listed, the concessions, the cloakroom, the shops, the apartments, every one of them still sits on top of that starving furnace. Somebody still has to carry the risk of the fire, the water, the repairs, the 114 tons of wood that must arrive whether the room is full or empty. All those beautiful rental streams are worthless if the furnace bankrupts you first. So the real question, the question that separates a rich man from a ruined one, is this: how do you keep the crowd and its rents, but hand the terrifying, unpredictable cost of the furnace to somebody else? And we know exactly how the smartest owners in the empire did it, because their playbook survived, carved in bronze. In the hills of what's now southern Portugal, in a Roman mining town called Vipasca, archaeologists found bronze tablets stamped with official lettering, and on them, in the formal language of law, is a bathhouse operating contract. It is the closest thing that survives to an owner's manual for this entire industry. The actual mechanism, spelled out. Here's how it worked. The bath's operating rights went up for auction. Not the building, the right to run it. The winning bidder is called in the contract the conductor, the lessee. He pays for the right to run the place and keep the ticket money. And in exchange for that right, the contract proceeds to bury him alive in obligations. He must heat the baths every single day at his own expense. He must keep them open for women from dawn until the 7th hour, and for men from the 8th hour into the night. He must keep the bronze boilers filled to the brim and the water flowing at all times. And when the lease ends, he must hand the entire building and every fixture back in good repair. Meanwhile, his prices are fixed for him, half an as for men, a full as for women, and certain people, the mine administrators and soldiers and children, bathe free. Now translate that out of the legalese. The owner collects a fixed payment, a clean, predictable number that arrives on schedule. And the lessee? The lessee eats the firewood. The lessee eats the wages, the water, the cracked boiler, the collapsed hypocaust floor. Every violent, unpredictable, ruinous cost in this business lands squarely on the tenant, while the owner's income arrives like clockwork, whether the winter is mild or brutal, whether the furnace behaves or explodes. The owner sold the risk and kept the crowd. That structure has a modern name. It's a franchise agreement. The operator buys the right to run the business and carries all the operating costs, while the owner collects a fee and takes none of the risk. Rome had it carved into bronze 18 centuries before anyone flipped a burger under a franchise sign. And here's the quiet genius of it, the thing that should make you slightly cold. The Vipaska contract is a masterpiece precisely because of what it makes the other man pay for. Rome wrote the tenant's ruin into bronze, the fuel, the repairs, the fixed prices he could never raise, and then called it an opportunity, an auction, a prize men competed to win. Which raises the obvious, screaming question: if you're the lessee, the conductor, staring at the firewood bill and the fixed prices, why not just raise the ticket and make the math work? Why not charge what it actually costs? The answer is the reason the price stayed nailed to the floor for centuries. And it has nothing to do with competition and everything to do with the most powerful men in Rome deliberately giving your product away for free, to buy something worth far more than your ticket. We left the conductor, the lessee, standing in the steam with an impossible problem. He's bought the right to run a bath at auction. He's carrying the whole furnace, the 114 tons of wood, the wages, the water, the boiler that will crack in the worst possible week. And his ticket price is fixed at almost nothing. So the obvious move, the move any businessman in history would make, is to raise the price. Charge what the fire actually costs. Make the math close, and he can't. And the reason he can't is the most important thing in this entire story, because it's the moment where economics stops explaining the bathhouse and politics takes over. The wall he'd hit wasn't economic. It was political. And once you see it, you understand not just the bath, but how power actually worked in Rome. Here's the mechanism. In Rome, free bathing was how powerful men bought love. Not metaphorically, literally as a
Did you hear
transaction.
about the gladiator
A
fight
rich or
tomorrow?
ambitious
I
man
need
would
2
announce
loaves of
that the
bread,
baths were
quickly.
free. He'd pay the operator's costs out of his own pocket for a day, a week, a year, and in exchange the entire city would walk through warm water with his name on their lips. It was the cheapest, most direct way to purchase the affection of a crowd that existed. And the biggest names in Roman history did it, openly, as a strategy. Take Agrippa, the Emperor Augustus's right hand, the second most powerful man in the world. In 33 BC, Agrippa took over as a city official, an aedile, and he made the baths free for his entire year in office. Free. The whole city, all year, on Agrippa's account. And he didn't stop there. When he died, he left his own grand bathhouse to the Roman people, free forever. A permanent monument to his own generosity, running on an endowment, competing with every paid bath in the city until the end of time. And Augustus himself did the same. The historian Cassius Dio recorded that Augustus once celebrated a homecoming by giving the whole city a free day at the baths, barbers included, the full luxury on the emperor. Dio wrote these gifts down for a reason, because the crowds remembered them for generations. That was the entire point. The free bath wasn't charity, it was advertising, purchased in gratitude, and it bought a loyalty that outlasted the men who paid for it. Now, try running a paid bath in that market. Sit in the conductor's chair and feel it. The richest, most powerful men alive periodically give your exact product away for free. And they're not doing it to compete with you. They don't care about you. You're beneath their notice. They're doing it to buy applause from the mob. Free bathing was their advertising budget. And your price, your 1 quadrans, your fixed as on the Vipaska tablet, sat trapped underneath it. You could never raise your ticket because the moment you did, some ambitious politician would throw the doors open for free across town, and your customers would abandon you mid-scrub to go toast his name in his water. That's the invisible ceiling. That's the thing bigger than custom and bigger than competition that kept the price nailed to the floor for centuries. It wasn't the market. It was the deliberate generosity of men buying political love with warm water, and the operator was crushed flat underneath it. The elites weren't your rivals. They were the weather, and the weather never broke in your favor. So look at what the poor conductor now faces, laid bare. His costs are savage, unpredictable, and rising. A furnace that burns whether the room is full or empty. And his revenue is capped, not by economics he could outcompete, but by politics he could never touch, and paid to him in the smallest coin that exists. His costs are on fire, sometimes literally, we'll get to that. And his income is legislated into poverty by men who'll never know his name. That is the trap. That is the cost of the myth, and here's who pays it. Not the owner sitting comfortably on his fixed rent, but the operator in the chair holding the fuel bill and the wage bill and the repair bill against a ticket the whole political order has decided must stay laughably small. And now let's make the cost concrete, because this is where the abstract cruelty of the model turns into a receipt with a name and a date on it. Everything we've said about the furnace being merciless, here's the proof, pulled from the sand of Egypt. The town of Oxyrhynchus, March 201 AD. Two officials, Dionysios, son of Serapion, and Lucius, son of Hermas, are overseeing the town's baths of Hadrian, and they file a written request for money for repairs. That document survived in the dry desert for 18 centuries, and we can read it. The amount they ask for is 3 talents of silver, 18,000 drachmae. And I need you to feel the weight of that number. That is a crushing sum for one repair cycle on one provincial bathhouse. Not construction, not building the thing from scratch. Maintenance, keeping an existing bath standing for another stretch. Baths didn't just cost fortunes to build, they ate fortunes just to keep from falling down. The furnace doesn't only burn wood, it burns the building itself, slowly from the inside, and it sends you the bill on its own schedule. Now stack the threats up, because the operator faces all of them at once, and any single one can end him. The first threat lives in his basement, and it never forgives. Fuel is his biggest cost, and it burns whether 400 people come through the door or 40. A slow month doesn't cool the furnace. The wood must arrive. And here's the sharper edge of it. A furnace room stacked high with cordwood, sitting under a building full of hot flues and heated floors, is a fire waiting for one careless hour. This isn't hypothetical. Even the mighty baths of Caracalla, the emperor's marble mountain, burned. Gutted badly enough in the 3rd century that an emperor had to fund the rebuild. If the imperial baths could go up in flames, your neighborhood balneum is a matchbox. The thing that keeps you in business is the thing most likely to destroy you. The second threat is slower, quieter, and just as fatal. The building fights you. Constant heat, constant moisture, lead pipes under strain, bronze boilers under pressure. A bathhouse is a machine that corrodes itself every single day it operates. It is designed, functionally, to eat itself. And Oxyrhynchus already showed you what that self-destruction costs to reverse. 3 talents of silver for one cycle, on one bath. The building doesn't wait for a disaster. It's failing all the time, on a schedule you don't control, and every repair lands on the operator's bill. The third threat doesn't care about your lease at all, disaster. Remember the earthquake that handed Julia Felix her opening in Pompeii? Flip it around. Her opportunity existed only because the town's other baths were rubble, and somebody owned that rubble. The same shock that minted her fortune ruined them. One bad tremor moves your entire investment in an afternoon from the asset column straight into the debris column. You can do everything right, manage the fire, pay the wages, keep the boilers filled, and the ground itself can end you between one heartbeat and the next. And then there's the last threat, the one that didn't just ruin an owner or burn a building, the one that ended the entire industry, all of it, in a single stroke. And it wasn't a fire, or an earthquake, or a bad winter. It was a pipe. Every fashionable bath in Rome drank from the aqueducts, 11 great channels, some of them running for miles above ground, on stone arches, out through open country where anybody could reach them. That was the single point of failure that nobody thought about, because it had held for 1,000 years. In 537 AD, somebody thought about it. The Gothic king Vitiges, besieging Rome, ordered every aqueduct cut. And we have an eyewitness, Procopius, secretary to the Roman general defending the city, who wrote down what he saw. The channels went dry, and with them went the baths of Rome. Roughly 850 businesses, an industry nearly 1,000 years old, the social heart of the ancient world's greatest city, finished. Not by competition, not by changing tastes, by a severed waterline out in a field, killed with shovels. Every business has a single point of failure somewhere. This one's ran for miles across open ground, and it could be ended by a besieging army with digging tools. So step back and look at the full picture of the cost, the real human cost of the beautiful trap. The owner, sitting on his fixed rent, is insulated from nearly all of it. But the operator, the conductor, the man who actually runs the steam, and the marble the poets loved, he stands at the intersection of every threat at once. His fuel bill is savage and rising. His building is corroding under him. His ticket is capped by emperors buying love. A fire, a tremor, or a severed pipe can wipe him out on any given day. And Roman society, remember, looks down on him for the trade in the first place, juvenile sneering, the law filing him among the disreputable. He carries all the risk, earns the smallest coin, and gets contempt for his trouble. That's the price. That's who really paid for the marble and the steam and the warm afternoons the postcard remembers. Not the emperors who gave it away for glory. Not the landlords collecting fixed rent on the shops and apartments. The operator in the chair, crushed between a furnace that eats forests and a price he's forbidden to raise. Which leaves one question still open, the one the whole story has been building toward. Knowing all of it now, the furnace and the repair bills, and the earthquakes and the pipe, was this ever a good business? Could you actually get rich owning a Roman bathhouse? Because two people ran the exact same building in the exact same steam, and one of them got rich while the other went under. And the difference between them isn't luck. It's a single decision, made before the first fire was ever lit. It's time to open the ledger and settle it. So let's settle it. Open the ledger and answer the title question, could you get rich owning a Roman bathhouse? And here's the first honest thing anyone has to say, and the reason the myth survived 2,000 years unchallenged. No Roman bath owner's account book survives. Not one. There is no ledger. What we're about to build is a reconstruction. But, and this matters, every single piece of it is attested. The fee from Cicero and Juvenal. The fuel from Tony Rook. The wages from the slave prices, the lease structure from the bronze of Vipasca, the repair costs from the sand of Oxyrhynchus. We didn't invent a number, we're just putting every real piece into one room and watching what it does. That's the difference between history and the postcard. The postcard gives you a feeling, the reconstruction gives you a receipt. So run 2 years through the same building and watch the myth die. Here's your good year. You own the building, Julia Felix style. An operator pays you fixed rent under a Vipasca-style lease, which means the firewood is his nightmare now, not yours. The 114 tons, the cracked boiler, the wet autumn that spikes wood prices, all his. Meanwhile, every shop in your street frontage is let. The apartments upstairs are full, maybe with a grumpy philosopher among the tenants, cursing the noise and paying you every month for the privilege. The concession men pay for their pitches, the aqueduct flows, the crowd pays you 6 different ways, and you never once touch the boiler. You clear a comfortable living from a trade that polite society looks down on, and you cry about the snobbery all the way to your strongbox. That's the good year. Notice what it's made of. Rents, leases, concessions. Notice what it's not made of. It's not made of bathing. Now the bad year. And here's the trap the myth sets. The bad year isn't a different year. It's the same building, the same steam, the same crowd. It's a different chair. This time you're the operator. You run the place yourself. And the wood prices spike after a wet autumn. A boiler cracks in midwinter, the busiest, most valuable season, the one you can't afford to lose. The Hippocaust floor needs work, and Oxyrhynchus already showed you what that bill looks like. 3 talents of silver. Meanwhile, your price is still 1 quadrans, because it's always 1 quadrans, because the local grandee just announced a free bathing day to celebrate his election, and half your customers are in his baths right now, warm and clean and toasting his name. Your costs are on fire, sometimes literally. Your revenue is capped by politics and paid in the smallest coin that exists. Same building, same steam. One chair gets rich, the other goes under. And Roman history is completely, unambiguously clear about which was which. This isn't a matter of opinion or bad luck. The winners were the landlords, the losers were the operators, every time. The structure decided the outcome before the first customer ever walked in. Julia Felix, daughter of nobody, no senators in her tree, was a winner because she understood the game. She rented baths, shops, and housing as one package, on a 5-year term, and handed the furnace to someone else. She wasn't a bathkeeper, she was a landlord who happened to own a bath. And that's the whole difference. And if you want the pattern at absolute maximum scale, if you want to see this exact move run by the Grandmaster, look at Crassus. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest private citizen in all of Roman history.
Fresh bread and
He
sweet
wasn't a
figs,
bathman,
the freshest
but he was the
grapes in the
supreme
city.
master of the
Get 'em
identical
here.
principle: own the box, never operate what's inside it, and make disaster work for you. Here's how Crassus got rich, according to Plutarch. When buildings caught fire in Rome, and in a crowded city of wood and oil lamps, buildings caught fire constantly, Crassus would show up at the blaze, not with water, with cash. He'd buy the burning building on the spot, at panic prices, from a terrified owner watching his life go up in smoke. And he'd buy the neighboring houses too, from neighbors certain the fire was about to take them next. Then his own crews of slave builders would move in, put the fires out, rebuild everything, and Crassus would lease it all back out. Plutarch says the largest part of Rome eventually passed through his hands. Pliny put his real estate fortune at 200 million sestertii. And let's put that on our ruler one last time, because it's staggering. 200 million sestertii is 50 million working days. 50 million human days of labor held by one man, built on the principle that you get rich owning the box, never operating the fire inside it. The lesson never changes. It didn't change from Crassus to Julia Felix to the anonymous landlord collecting rent off Seneca. The money is in owning the box, not in operating what's inside it. And the losers, the operators, the conductores, held the fuel bill and the wage bill and the repair bill against a fixed, comically small ticket. The Vipasca contract, remember, is a masterpiece precisely because of what it makes the other man pay for. Rome wrote the tenant's ruin into bronze and called it an opportunity, called it a prize, auctioned it off to men who competed to win the right to be crushed. So now, here's the part of this story that should genuinely unsettle you. Here's the error in the record, the reason the myth is still alive. Ask yourself, why, after all of this, do we still picture the bath as a temple of leisure? Why is the postcard version, the marble, the steam, the civilized Roman soak, the story we inherited when the documents so clearly tell a story about landlords, leases, risk dumping, and ruin? Because of who left the records and what they cared about. Look at whose voices survived. Seneca complaining about the noise from inside his rented rooms, a wealthy tenant describing the crowd as an annoyance, never once as an income stream. He literally could not see the machine he was standing in. Juvenal, the satirist, sneering at bath-keeping as a low trade, recording the contempt, not the profit. The poets giving us the marble and the oiled shoulders and the plunge pool. The literary record, the one that shaped every schoolbook since, was written by and for the class of people who used the baths, or looked down on those who ran them, never by the people who actually did the accounting. The men who understood the real business, the Julia Felixes and the conductores, mostly didn't write philosophy. Julia Felix's whole business model survives not in a treatise, but by accident. an advertisement, frozen under volcanic ash. The Vipaska model survives only because someone stamped it into bronze and buried it in a mine. The real receipt from Oxyrhynchus survives only because the Egyptian desert doesn't rot paper. Compare the two versions side by side and the error comes into focus. The official version, the version we inherited, says, "The bath was a marvel of leisure, the ticket was gloriously cheap, and cheap bathing was a gift of civilization to the common man." And every word of that is true on the surface. The ticket was 1 quadrans. Bathing was nearly free. But the reconstruction tells you why it was free. And the why is the whole story the postcard leaves out. It was free because the ticket was never the business. It was free because emperors gave it away to buy love, and landlords didn't care what the ticket cost because they made their money on the shops and the rents and the concessions, and the operators were forbidden from raising it and got ruined trying to survive underneath it. The cheapness that the myth celebrates as generosity was, from the inside, a trap, a fixed political ruinous ceiling. The record didn't lie by inventing things. It lied by omission, by preserving the voices of the men who bathed and sneered, and losing the voices of the men who paid the furnace bill. History got written by the tenants and the poets, not the accountants. And so we remember the steam and forget the ledger. We remember Seneca's beautiful complaint and forget that he was a line item. The myth of the bath as a temple of leisure survives because the people who profited from it never needed to explain it, and the people crushed by it never got to write it down. And that's the deeper pattern, the one worth carrying out of this. When only one class of people leaves records, you don't get history. You get their point of view, hardened into fact. The marble survived because marble survives. The accounts didn't survive because nobody thought a bathkeeper's ledger was worth keeping. The trade was beneath notice, remember, filed among the disreputable. So the very contempt that Roman elites had for the business is the reason we lost its true story. We inherited their snobbery as our history. We remember what they wanted remembered. So the verdict on the title question, finally, with the ledger open. Could you get rich owning a Roman bathhouse? Yes, if you understood you were a landlord. No, if you believed you were a bathkeeper. The bath itself, the steam and the marble part, the part the whole world remembers, was barely a business at all. It was a magnet. The fortune was in everything stuck to it, the shops, the rooms, the concessions, the crowd. The water pulled the people in, and the people paid for everything except the water. And if you doubt that bathing alone could never pay, if some part of you still wants to believe the ticket was the point, then look at the very top of the market, where the numbers are so extreme they end the argument for good. Because the emperor's baths weren't a bigger version of your business. They were the proof that your business, as the myth describes it, never existed at all. Look at the top of the market, because the top of the market ends the argument for good. The baths of Caracalla, the emperor's marble mountain, the one I told you back at the start, would eventually hurt. Here are the numbers. Building it took around 9,000 workers a year, peaking above 13,000 men in a single year, laying more than 2,000 tons of material every single day, to create a hall where 600 people could bathe at once. Sit with that, 2,000 tons a day, 13,000 men, to make a room for people to get clean in, at 1 quadrans a head. Nobody spends that to earn quadrants back. It's not even arithmetic, it's an insult to arithmetic. You could run that hall at full capacity every hour of every day for 1,000 years and never recover what it cost to lay the marble, which means the emperor was never trying to. And that's the final key that unlocks the whole thing. The emperor wasn't your competitor, he was your proof. Proof that at the very top, Roman bathing was never a business at all. It was advertising, it was loyalty, purchased one free soap at a time, on a scale so enormous it wraps all the way back around and confirms what the humble neighborhood balneum was telling us the whole time. The water was never the product. The crowd was. Caracalla spent a mountain of silver to buy the love of a city. Agrippa made the baths free for a year to buy the same thing smaller. The neighborhood landlord charged 1 quadrans and made his money on the shops. Different scales, one identical truth running through all of them. Nobody who understood the game ever expected the bathing to pay. The steam was the bait. The fortune, or the glory, was in everything the steam pulled toward it. So go back, one last time, to Seneca, sitting in his rented rooms, cursing the racket coming up through the floor. And now listen to that noise the way the building's owner heard it, because it's a completely different sound. The grunting athletes, those are customers. The screaming hair plucker, a tenant, paying for his pitch. The sausage man's song, that's rent, arriving in melody form. Every single noise that ruined the philosopher's afternoon was an income stream, itemized and singing. Seneca heard an assault on civilized quiet. The owner heard music. And here's the final perfect irony, the one that closes the whole story. Even Seneca's own complaint was written from inside the machine. He was a tenant. He was paying too. The bath anchored his address. His rent was one more line on the ledger. The richest philosopher in Rome, tutor to an emperor, sat inside somebody's money machine, writing beautiful prose about the noise, and never once realized he was the noise. Because a Roman bathhouse was never really in the business of selling baths. The quadrans at the door was the cheapest thing in the entire building. Cheaper than the sausages, cheaper than the massage, cheaper than a month in the rooms above the steam. What you actually owned when you owned a bathhouse was the ancient world's shopping mall, with a furnace in the basement. The water pulled the crowd. The
Finest
crowd
pottery in the
paid for
city.
everything else.
Did you hear about
You
the
never got
gladiator
rich at
fight
the
tomorrow?
turnstile.
I need 2
You
loaves
got
of
rich
bread,
owning
quickly.
the box. And the whole city walked through it, one quadrans at a time. Now, why does any of this matter, 18 centuries after the last aqueduct ran dry? Because the pattern didn't die when the water stopped. The pattern is the most durable thing the Romans ever built, and you are standing inside a version of it right now. Look at where the real money sits in our own economy, and you'll see Vipaska carved into everything. The franchise owner doesn't flip the burgers, he owns the box, and the operator who signed the contract carries the fuel bill, the wage bill, the broken equipment, against prices he doesn't fully control. That's the conductor and the landlord exactly. Look at the platform economy. The company that owns the app takes its fixed cut off the top of every ride, every delivery, every booking, while the driver owns the car, buys the gas, absorbs the risk, and eats the cost when things break. Own the crowd, rent out the risk. It's the Julia Felix model with a phone in it. Look at the mall itself, the literal descendant. The anchor store pulls the foot traffic, and the landlord charges every small shop for proximity to a crowd it didn't have to create. The bath was the anchor, the shops paid the rent. Nothing about that has changed except the plumbing. And the deepest lesson, the one that should stay with you longest, is the one about the record itself. We inherited the poet's version of the bath, not the accountant's, because the poets are the ones who wrote things down, and the accountants weren't considered worth preserving. We remembered the marble and forgot the furnace bill. And that same thing is happening right now, to our own moment. Ask yourself whose version of today's economy is being written down and celebrated, and whose ledger is quietly being lost. Because in 2,000 years, somebody will inherit a story about our world, and it'll be the version told by the people who owned the box, not the people who carried the risk inside it. The myth always gets written by the winners. The furnace bill always gets forgotten, unless someone insists on opening the ledger. That's the whole point of doing this, of following the coin through the steam instead of admiring the marble. Not because the marble wasn't beautiful. It was. But because beautiful is the story the powerful are always happy for you to remember, precisely because it hides who was actually paying. Follow the money, and the Temple of Leisure turns into a machine for transferring risk from the people who owned things to the people who did things. And once you can see that machine in a Roman bathhouse, you cannot unsee it anywhere. The whole city walked through one quadrans, and almost none of them ever knew whose box they were standing in. Now, before you go, 3 things. First, I want your verdict, not just a reaction. We've spent this whole story on one figure who understood the game better than almost anyone. Julia Felix, daughter of nobody, no senators in her family tree, who looked at an earthquake that flattened her town's baths and saw an opportunity, and built a machine to rent the crowd every single way it could be rented. So comment below and tell me which one she was. Do you think Julia Felix knew exactly what she was doing? A cold, brilliant operator who saw the trap and built it on purpose? Or was she just a product of her system, doing the obvious thing anyone with property would have done? Type yes if she knew, no if she was just playing the only game available. I read these, and the split on this one always tells me something. Second, send this to one person who still thinks the Roman baths were just about getting clean. One person who pictures the marble and the steam and stops there. This might change how they see it. And more than that, it might change how they look at the franchise on their corner, the app on their phone, the mall down the road. Once you see the box and the crowd, you see it everywhere. Give someone else that pair of glasses. And third, here's where we're going next week. We stayed on the winner's side of the ledger today, mostly. Next time, we cross over. I'm going to walk you through the Vipaska bronze tablets, line by line, the actual owner's manual for this entire industry, stamped in metal in a Roman mining town, and show you the exact clauses, in their own words, that were written to ruin the operator while protecting the owner. Proof, carved in bronze 18 centuries before the word franchise existed, that the people who designed this system knew precisely what they were doing to the man who signed it, and did it anyway and called it an opportunity. Follow the money. It never stops talking. Subscribe, and you'll always hear it under the noise.